Judel Niemeyer, and today we're going to demonstrate how to make the Raindrops quilt for you. Some of you also might recognize this design as Slice of Paradise. It is true that the design has two names. Slice of Paradise is a name used by Blueprint, which carries a version of the quilt in Blueprint fabrics on their marketplace. They have chosen a special name for their project, however, it is the same exact quilt. Today's tutorial will start out with a brief discussion on how to select your fabric, then cover the cutting steps you will take for your pattern. We will then join Judy Niemeyer for a tutorial on how to paper piece the large and small spike units and do the curved piecing to assemble your squares. Let's get started with selecting your fabric. Last week, Judy designed a Raindrops quilt in an online quilt planning program called Quiltster. Raindrops is designed to be a scrappy layout where the bright fabrics are all the same yardage and the light fabrics are all the same. Then, lots of pieces are cut from each color and sewn together in a scrappy arrangement as shown. The fabrics Judy chose are shown here, with the brights requiring 5/8 of a yard of fabric and the lights 7/8 of a yard of fabric. When the fabrics were cut, Judy paired them up with each other, so fabric A1 will be sewn to fabric B1, fabric A2 will be sewn to B2, and so on. If you are interested in this colorway, at the end of the video we will show you how to use Quiltster to find a version of this kit to purchase. We only have enough fabrics for a couple samples, but there are other colorways available there as well. We will show them to you in our Quiltster discussion at the end of the tutorial. You can also use Quiltster to design your own version of Raindrops. If you choose to do this, you will be able to print out a color version of your quilt. All of the fabrics will be listed, and it will tell you which fabrics you paired in your quilt. For example, A1 and B1, A2 and B2, etc. So you should be ready to start your cutting as soon as you have this information printed. You can also simply do this on your own without Quiltster. However, it is nice to be able to see how your choices will look in an image before you get started. The first step in cutting is to stack your A1 to A10 fabrics with A10 on the bottom in reverse numerical order, ending with A1 on the top. From the 5/8 yard cuts, you will then cut 3 sets of strips. 2 will be 5 inches by 42 inches, and 1 will be 9 inches by 42 inches. From your newsprint, cut out the template layout sheets shown in the graphic. Cut these out exactly on the dark solid line around each Unit A, B, and C background template layout sheet, and position them on each strip of fabric as shown. Your pattern includes enough newsprint sheets that you will not have to restack any fabrics underneath them. Simply lay them on top of the strip and finish completing the cutting. I don't think it's necessary to show you every cut, but this demonstrates how template layout sheets work. First, you cut between the layout sheets. We're showing you the Unit A layout sheets as an example. Then you cut each layout sheet and the fabrics beneath it apart on the internal cut lines. These are labeled as cut line 1, 2, 3, etc. Just follow in order until all of the pieces are cut apart. Clip each stack together without messing up the order of the fabrics and place them into the appropriate bag, which is outlined in your pattern. Complete the same process for the Unit B and C background pieces as well. Next, you're going to do the same exact cutting process for fabrics B1 to B10. Stack the fabrics in order with B10 on the bottom up to B1 on the top, then place the noted T-templates and accent template layout sheets on the appropriate strips. The difference between a T-template and a template layout sheet is that T-templates must be cut to the exact size of the template. Therefore, you may want to rough cut around these, then break your stacks down into only a couple pieces at a time to do more precision cutting on the T-template pieces, especially for T-template A, as it has a curve in it. The better you do at cutting the pieces at this stage, the easier your quilt will go together in the end. When you have finished, don't mess up the order of your fabrics. Clip the templates to the top of each stack of fabric and place them in the appropriate bags. Now, it is time to join Judy, where she will show you how to stack and prepare the pieces for paper piecing, the paper piecing process, and then how to assemble the block.
Okay Okay, ladies, it's my turn. I'm going to start showing you guys how to set up your bags. I've already done some preparation work on the bags, but I'm going to do a little bit more with them so that you can understand how the bag system actually works, all right? What we've done here is in your instructions that Judel went over, she told you guys to stack your dark fabrics here. These are referred to as accent fabrics, but they're really just your dark fabrics, and we use them for the background sections in our quilt. These templates can be used in several different patterns, and so in some patterns these papers are put with light fabric and other patterns are put with dark fabrics. In this particular quilt, the Raindrops, the one that we're making, we've made all of the background fabrics out of our darker fabrics, all right? We have 10 different colors, and we've numbered each one of these fabrics. Number 1 is on the top, number 2, number 3, and we end with number 10 on the bottom. Now we did the same exact thing with our lighter fabrics that we use for the spikes in this quilt and the main background part of the quilt. They're also paired 1 through 10 with stacked 1 through 10 with number 1 on top and number 10 on the bottom, all right? So basically you're going to cut out your template layout sheets, and then you're going to set them up on your strip. So every strip is stacked exactly the same. Then we're just going to take a ruler and we're going to cut these steps into, just cut these off like this. Okay. Now, if you want, you can actually save these and just put a paper clip on them in order, because if you set them by your machine and you're sewing and you realize, oh, I've messed up my order, you'll always have this to refer back to, all right? So I just put a paper clip on it and put it right by my machine, right? So now I have 3 of these. Each one has 10. I started my bag for bag 1 here, and we've already cut our light fabrics, which we're using for the spikes, which is the hatch section, okay? And then I've already cut out my foundation papers. So each one of my foundation, I have 3 groups. So that's a group of 10, this is a group of 10, this one's a group of 10, this is a group of 10 fabrics, a group of 10 fabrics. Fabric number 1 is on the top, and a group of 10 fabrics, okay? Then I like to just take and put these together, and I'll just take a couple of the paper clips and clip the whole group together like this. And then we fold it back up, and we're going to just slip it back into bag 1. Then we're going to do that again with this one. And then we're going to fold it up. And what I like to do is work on 10 at a time rather than getting all 30 of them set up there. So now I'm going to just set this bag off to the side. And we're going to set these off to the side, and I'm going to go through the next bag with you. So again, I have all of my pieces stacked. And these are stacked in the same exact order as my last group. And I have my template layout sheets. I've already cut up 1 strip of layout sheets here. So, and separated those out into bags. So we're just going to cut through the lines. And if you don't have a big rotary cutter, you may not be able to slice through all 10 of these together. So if you use your repositionable glue, once you can stack them in stacks of 5, and then what you'll do is remove this template and set it on your next stack, and then you have to put the 2 stacks back together so you have all 10 fabrics layered. I use a big rotary cutter. I always change my blade before I start a project like this, because if my blade's really sharp, it's going to cut through those layers of fabric really easy. So this is the same one here. These are smaller ones. So I'm actually just going to take that paper clip off, and I'm going to come back and just cut that a little bit closer to the bottom and then put the paper clip. It makes it a little bit easier to put it onto your foundation paper if that's cut more to the size. Alright, so I'm going to take, I have 4 stacks here, so that gives me 40. So we have bag number 2. These are my B units, and I've already cut all of the spike pieces are right here, and each one of these stacks has the 10 pieces in it. So I have 40 in this group and 40 of them in this group. I have 40 here. So I'm going to take and put one of these and clip it together. And then I have my papers, and these are actually counted into groups of 20. So I'll go back and recount those in groups of 10. But in the meantime, I'm going to put all of these back in here, because the process for paper piecing is the same with this as it is with the large one. And I'm just going to, that's my B group, and it's in my bag B. And then this group here, this is bag 3, and these are unit C. These are the little tiny ones, right? Now in the instructions, I only have to make, I think it's 24 of these. But in my instructions, if I read the instructions, it's going to tell me to pull the bottom 4 pieces off of each pile, and we're not going to use those. So I'm going to do that right now, because if I don't, I'm going to forget by the time I get back to doing the paper piecing on this. And you do have the choice to go through this and pick out the colors you don't want. So I'm just pulling the bottom 4 off. But if you want to use some of those and pull others out, you have that option. Just make sure that you keep the same ones in your stack. Now we're going to do the same thing with these. We have to pull 4 off of the bottom of each stack. You do have some extra templates in your package, so if you're one of these people that you just can't throw those away, you can go make some extra little pieces and make some little quilts out of them, or some little throw pillows, or whatever you want to do. If you want to make them and put them on the back of your quilt, you can do that as well. And if you want to add more to the front of your quilt, you could do that as well. It's whatever you choose to do. All right. So now each one of these sets go together. So when I'm done, I'm going to have 4 groups of 6 here. And these are going to go back into bag B3, like that. And in the meantime, I'm just going to take these and put them back in there as well. And just stack them like this, clip them together. So if I do decide I want to go back and make some extras, I have them. Right. So that's my 3rd bag, bag number 3. And bag number 4, I've already cut all the pieces for it, but I'm going to show you what's in bag number 4. So what we've done here is we have 30 of these pieces, and then we have 20, or there might be, yeah, there should be 20 of these for the small blocks. Then we have 10 of the big pieces, and you will end up pulling 2 of these off, but you can make that decision later. And then we should have 20 of the rectangles. So these are made for your outside border pieces. These are your corners, plus you have a few 4-patch pieces, and these are the big backgrounds. So that's what you should have. And then you're also going to have some little template pieces here. Now, I am going to show you some different ways to actually do the cutouts on this after we make the units. But these pieces, you can actually glue these onto some template plastic if you want to use them to cut around. But I'm going to show you how I do it, which I actually just use the foundation papers to do my cutting when I get ready to do that. So we're going to put all of these back in the bag, and those are bag 4. Once you get all of the cutting done, then we get to start paper piecing. Now, this quilt I'm working on, I'm going to make 10 of the large pieces, and then I'm going to make 1 each of the other pieces so that I can show you how to do the curve piecing and how to do the cutouts, all right? And then I'm going to put it back in a box, and I'm going to sell it as a kit. And the first person to go out and buy it, once it's posted, gets the 10 pieces that we make plus the beginning of the curve piecing. So if you want something that's partially sewn, watch for that post, right? Okay, so we're going to start here. There's my pieces. And the first thing I want to do is I want to number my papers. And I like to number them under the last section here on the back side. So this is going to become number 1, number 2. And what that's telling me is that's the color that we're going to be using. It goes onto that paper. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay. Now I'm going to take my ruler here, and I have all of these paper clips on, so I like to use my add-a-quarter ruler because the lip it sets on top of those paper clips, and then it balances really nice. So I can actually take this, and I'm going to cut on line 1, and I'm just going to set that aside like that. Then we're going to do line 2, and we're going to set it like that. Line 3, and notice that I'm not mixing these up because they're actually in the stacking order. So if I just keep them together, I don't have to spend 20 minutes trying to find all the numbers on it. Those cut. Now we're going to pick up this one, and we're going to start with cut line 1. Now I'm going to move it off to the side. 1, 2. Okay, we're ready to stack everything. So we're going to find the very largest number, which is section 17, and we're going to find the sew side, and we're going to stack the sew side so it's away from you, right? Then we're going to find section 16, and we're going to find the sew side and stack it like that. Then 15, and then we go to 14, then we go to 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and number 1. Now, my recommendation is you do that cutting right before you're ready to start your paper piecing. If I were to cut all of them in the whole bag and then come back and try to figure out which pieces go with which, I'm going to get myself confused. So I like to do my cutting right before I start my paper piecing. In your instructions, it always tells you to cut before you get to there. I'm telling you, just wait and cut right before you start your paper piecing. And we have to add it to the cutting instructions in the pattern. Otherwise, we'd have to go through another whole set of cutting instructions to explain how to cut them apart. So just leave them together until you're ready to start paper piecing. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is add the fabric under section 1. Okay, now I have these stacked with fabric number 1 on the top. And so what I have to do is take this piece like that, and I'm going to flip it wrong side up on it, okay? Then we're going to grab our glue stick, and I'm just going to rub a little bit of glue right along the edge, and then we're going to place it on there like that. Now we're going to take the second piece, put it right on top of it. And then we're going to third piece. And remember, I numbered my papers. So my papers are now numbered to follow the fabric. We're done with the gluing. So I have this long tail here that's not on the fabric, and all my papers are stacked pretty much the same. So I'm just going to come in here and get rid of part of that. So now I have number 10 on the top. Okay, so we're going to go through the trimming process, and I'm going to take the very first one. I'm going to place my fold template on line 1, fold the foundation paper back, pick up my cord ruler, and trim that excess off so I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance cut. And then I'm going to stack it right there. Then we're going to pick up the next piece, which is fabric number 9. I'm going to fold it back on the fold line and trim a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to stack it on top. And we're done with our stack. We're going to end up with paper number 1 and fabric number 1 on the top. Now we're going to pick up the next stack of fabric. This is for section 2. My fabric on the top is my number 1 fabric. Okay. Now I'm just going to show you a little trick, because I did not trace the back side of the paper on this, because you really don't need to. it's easy to find your section. Is I'm going to find where it says line 2, which is my fold line, but I'm going to slide it over to the dashed line next to that, which is your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to crease the back side of that paper. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to fold it all the way back. And I'm going to take a ruler and I'm just going to show you. I'm going to mark my very first piece. Here's the bottom and here's the top, okay? So when I put my fabric underneath, I have to cover this section right here, and I can just kind of scribble it so that you can see where that section is. And it's going to be in the same spot on every paper, so I usually just mark the first one, get the first one started correctly, and then just follow the leader. This is my sew side, and I'm going to just show you again with the template. See where it says sew side? That sew side has to be against you. You cannot turn it the other way. It needs to be away from you, because now all we have to do is lift this paper and slide it over there. And the angle of the fabric is cut to the same angle as that section number, right? And now we have those two. We lined up the 1/4 inch seam allowance right there. Now we're going to pick up the next piece. This is fabric number 2, and I'm going to move it back here about a 1/2 inch from here to here so I can see my paper. And then I just have to pick up the next paper and lay it on there just like this. And basically I'm going to line up my fabrics, because when I was putting them on, I kept them all pretty straight and even. And there's our next piece. And we're going to put number 3 with fabric number 3. And we're going to take fabric number 4 here. And we're going to take paper number 4 and match it up to the edge. And notice how I setting it back a little bit. I want to stagger those because it makes it easier for us to pick it up when we start doing the paper piecing. We're going to line that up. I have my light fabrics around the bottom, so I'm also setting it up so that we can see the just a little tiny bit of the light, and I'm going to hold it up so you can actually see. So see how you can see the light right across the top of it? That's going to make it so that I don't have a shadow when I do my pressing. Anytime your light fabric is on the bottom, you need to be able to, when you set the dark fabric on top, you need to have a shadow of the light fabric showing right along the edge. And number 10, number 10. All right, so now I have a nice stack here. I'm going to grab my fabric pin. This is a little bit easier to use than the wide one. And I'm going to come over here to the very first piece, and I'm going to fold back the fabric and put glue between the 2 fabric pieces along the seam allowance. What that does is it makes it so when I pick it up, my fabrics stay onto my paper. I don't have to worry about it moving when we go to the machine. Okay, I'm going to set the stitch length up on my machine, and I want the length to be set at about 1.9. Right? Now we're going to pick up the very first piece, And I'm going to actually roll it around so that when I open it up, I can open it up this way. So since I'm doing that, I'm going to turn it this way on the whole stack so it'll be easier to pick them up. I should have number 10 on the top, which I do. And we're going to find line 1, the solid line. Don't sew on the dashed line, you only sew on the solid line. And we're going to start sewing at the bottom. Then we're going to pick up the next piece. If you have a machine that has a thread cutter, you can cut in between each one of these papers. My little demonstrating machine here does not have a thread cutter. This is my number 1 paper, so I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to cut between each paper, and I'm stacking them in order. Number 10's on the top. We're going to go to the ironing board. Okay, this little point right here at the top, sometimes it's hard. People have a tendency to press that and press a little fold into it. So what I'm going to suggest that you do, if you haven't done much of the paper piecing, is to use a little starch pan. The company name on this is Acorn. And I'm just going to run that right along that seam because that'll open up that point. And then when I put my iron on it, I'm going to press in and make sure that that fabric gets opened up right along there. And now we're just going to keep going. Okay, we have our stack here. I should have number 1 on the top. Right, so I'm going to just set these off. I'm going to set them right over here. We're going to pick up our very first piece. We're going to place the fold template down right on line 2. We've already stitched along this line, so what you're going to do is put your finger right at the top of that thread and at the paper, and you're going to tear that down until you hit the fold template there. Now when I fold this over, you're going to have that little piece of paper there. We're going to put the fold template on, or the add a quarter, I'm sorry. And then we're going to trim a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is paper number 1. So I'm going to get my stack ready. And the very first piece is fabric number 1. And if I look, you can tell that you're putting the right piece on because you're going to have the same color under every one of these. So now I'm going to do the same thing I showed you before, where I'm going to place this along line 3 and then slide it over to the dashed line, crease that section, and then I'm just going to mark it. And that shows me, and here's the top of my paper, so I have to have my fabric underneath there. So we're going to take this, and I'm going to lay it right down along there. And because my dark fabric's on the bottom, I don't have to worry about any little shadowing. And I'm going to make sure that it covers. Now, if you get this down too low, you're not going to cover this section, okay? if you get this up here too high, you're not going to cover the top of the paper. You're going to miss the top of the paper. So you have to find where it's going to center in there. And then just take your fold template and fold your paper back. And if you can see fabric along this edge, then you know you're on. Okay? So I have the first piece positioned. Then we're going to grab the second piece. We're going to get that in place. Then I'm going to pick this up. Paper number 2. And look, I grabbed 2 papers even after that. That was number 3. That's why you number them. So that if you do grab 2 or you put one in the wrong place, you can check your numbers as you go and always make sure you're in order. We're going to trim, and then we're going to stack this piece just like that. Okay, we have our next stack, and now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to come in here and pick that up and start gluing the edges again, right? When we get the whole stack done, we're ready to go back to the machine. And we just keep the repetition the same until we get the whole stack done. Okay, after you get all of your paper piecing done, you need to do your trimming, right? So you're going to basically just take your ruler, and I really like Creative Grid rulers for doing this because they have a tendency to hold the paper. So we're going to cut off that one edge. Cut your straight sides first. And then you're just going to come in here and put your blade right on the line, okay? And then just start cutting. This is free motion cutting. And you're just going to roll the paper underneath there and cut that curve. Alright, then on the top part, you can use a curved ruler, which is right here. We can take this, and it's just got a slight curve built into it. And as I roll it around, it stays right on that curve. So if you want the protection of it, having a ruler there, it works pretty good. If you don't have one of these curved rulers, then just take it and turn the paper right underneath your blade, and your blade's pretty much going straight when you do it that way. And now we have a piece done. Okay, we're going to go over the curved piecing. So you've got to go to the back of your directions before you start sewing a bunch of pieces together. You need to go back and figure out how to read the layout. If you choose to follow the layout we've put in the pattern, we've told you what colors pair up with which pieces, all right? So I have my background piece goes here, and then we're going to put another little cutout template right there. So, and then I'm going to show you how to do the littlest one as well. But if you notice, this piece is going to be sewn onto here. This piece is onto here, and then we'll add the cutout, and I'll show you how to do a cutout, and then we're going to sew that piece in. Right? So when I'm working with really tiny curves like that, a lot of times I like to leave the paper on the bottom piece. So this is going to be my bottom, and I'm going to remove the paper from this one because there's no way you can get that to roll around if you leave the paper on it. And so I'm just going to start at the very last piece that you sewed on, and you're going to work in reverse order. So I started with section 17, and I'm just going to keep working back, and you're going to find that your pieces are going to tear off a lot easier for you when you do that. You will notice that some of your pieces will seem like they fall off and come off really easy, and others you have to work a little bit more to get them off. There are lots of different tools that you can use, like purple things. Okay, I'm going to show you how to use a few tools. I normally just use my hands, but some people have a hard time holding on to the paper. So if you'll actually just take and score that paper, a lot of times that'll just tear off a lot easier for you. And then you've got to get your finger underneath the next piece, like this. And so sometimes there's lots of different tools that you can use to do this with. And then it comes, so the other thing I'm going to show you really quick is if you have a pair of tweezers, you can actually grab a hold of the paper and get it out of the little tiny spots like this as well. Now if you're working with dark fabrics, it's not a big deal to get all of that paper out of those tiny pieces. But when you're working with lighter fabrics, their chances are that newsprint will shadow through your light fabric. So you want to clean it off as best you can. So up in the dark areas, I don't worry so much about it, but when I'm working with really light areas, I try to get as much of that paper out as possible to make sure I don't have any shadows from it. Okay, we're going to start the curve piecing. One of the first things I'm going to show you is there's a lot of bulk in here, and so I'm just going to take my little curved scissors and kind of trim back some of that extra bulk from the seam allowances, because it'll press down a lot better for me. And when you're doing this, remember you're only cutting the fabric that's on the seam allowance. You're not cutting your fabric underneath it. So now what I'm going to do is I have my piece here. It's going to look like that. Then you're going to flip this over. And the first thing we're going to do is take and lay that straight along that edge there. And then we're going to find a flower pin. And we're going to weave that pin right along that edge, like that. Okay. Because you don't want this to, you want to keep that right along that edge. Then we're going to roll this around, and we're going to pin the other edge. Now the technique I'm showing you here is not something you're going to use with all of your curve piecing, but it works fabulous for doing the raindrops pattern. Alright, so we have both edges done. We've left our paper on the bottom, so we have a stabilizer that keeps that somewhat stiff. Now I'm going to take and I'm going to start pleating this like an accordion, and I'm going to take, see if you can see the way I'm doing this, and I'm going to, I'll go from this edge, then you'll be able to see it a little bit better. So I'm just going to lay that down like that, and then I'm going to roll that around, fold it over, then I'm going to fold the next one over, fold the next one, and notice that I'm holding on to the fabric up here along the curved edge. Then we're going to fold that over. We're going to fold it over, fold it over, fold it over. Fold it. So when I'm done, I basically have brought all of the bulk down here to the bottom, and this part is rolling right around that curve. Okay. So now we're going to find a glue pin. I'm going to find something to hold that in place. Then I'm just going to take my pin, and I'm just going to run a little bit of glue along there. We're going to glue those edges. So we're going to place this at our sewing machine, and we're going to put the edge of the pressure foot right along that curve, and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to grab a little tiny chunk of paper. When I start sewing on something like this, a lot of times it's just too much height there to get started with, and your thread isn't real tight along the edge. So if I actually fold this paper up and sew just a little bit on that paper, now I can lay that curve in there, the edge of the curve, line it up. I'm going to go down a little bit on my stitch length to about a 2, and I'm going to take just a couple stitches in that, and then I'm going to pull my pin out. And after I get that sewn along the edge, I'm going to loosen up that fabric. And as I sew, I want to watch to make sure I don't get any pleats. We should have our needle down. And now I'm just going to, each time I move this a little bit, it's going to pull any puckers that might show up underneath my pressure foot out. So we're just going to keep moving that back. That flattens the space a couple inches right in front of the pressure foot, or the needle, before you sew. All right, before I go over that pin, I'm going to pull that off and sew straight off the edge. So if you're wondering whether or not you did a good job sewing, flip it over. And if your threads are right on the line, it means you can pat yourself on the back and say, good job. Right? So now we're going to flip it over like this. And if you'll look at it, see how nice that the edges line up there? By the time I get that pressed, I have nice straight edges along both sides. And that's what you're after. So having the paper allows you to be able to see whether you took too deep of a seam allowance on there as you're getting used to sewing these. Okay, now we're going to put the next piece on. I'm going to fold this piece in half, and I'm going to just crease my center right there. Then I'm going to fold this piece in half, and I'm going to crease the center here. So right now, this is the right side of my fabric, and I'm going to take and put that right down there and match up that center. We're going to grab our glue pen, and I'm just going to put a little bit of glue along both sides of that. And then I'm going to open it up and just get that started right along the center edge there. Now I'm going to come back over to this side here, and I'm going to line this along that edge there, and that should be perfectly straight and a perfect 90-degree corner along there. Right? Then you're going to do the same thing here. And again, that should be a 90-degree corner straight on both edges. Okay? Now, we're just going to take our glue pen and work this back to the center, start along the edge, and just lay that fabric right down onto the curve and you should have a perfect fit there, okay? Then we're going to come back over to this one, and we're going to start on the edge again, and work back to the center. And don't stretch it. It should just fit right along the inside. There you go. So now I'm going to do my 1/4 inch seam allowance again. I'm going to grab some paper here and I'm going to sew on my paper again. Now we're going to put this up. Get that started right along the edge. And again, as you sew, if I just keep sewing, I'm going to end up with a pucker. So what I want to do is lift my pressure foot just a little bit and move the fabric back under so it flattens that sew area just in front of the needle. So to get started, I would just do a little bit of finger pressing along that seam, because once you get ready to put the whole quilt together, you're probably going to want to come back and do some repressing as you start to assemble blocks. But for now, you can just press everything out, and then if you decide you want to lock your seams, sew your block together with opposing seams, you can do that. Set that up in once you start sewing your blocks together. All right, so now I have to add this piece into here. And I like to sew these on before I put that in there, because you never know when you put it on the wall, you might get it in the wrong corner or the wrong spot. So I like to get all of my squares lay down on the wall and then come back and add these pieces where I see fit. If I want to change the layout that the pattern is set up for, I have the ability to do that. So if I cut all of these cutouts out before I sewed it on, then I'm stuck and I have to do exactly the way the pattern tells me. All right. So this is our repositionable glue pen, and I'm just going to run this on the back along this edge. Let that dry for just a little bit. And then I'm going to slip it right along the edge of that fabric. So you should have an overlap here of your seam allowance, all right? But it's square along here. So notice that my paper, my template paper, this is T-Template A, has 2 sizes here. We've given you, I think, 4 or 5 of these templates in your instruction. So you want to set one of them up as for your B cuts and one of them up for your C cuts, all right? Because every time all the blocks are a little bit different. So now all I have to do is just come in here and cut on that line. So the other thing I want to show you is if I want, I can actually take and lay this one down and see how that matches right up. So if I don't have my template there, I can actually use this as a piece by simply straightening it up along this edge and straightening it up along this edge and doing my cutout, because that section for my B cut is the same exact size of the cutout area on my foundation paper. All right. So we're going to take our rotary cutter, and we're not going to panic. We're just going to start cutting. And I'm cutting a hole for my B unit because this is a B unit size right here. And that's going to go in there like that. So now I can pull this off. And I'm not going to lose that template, because I can just keep reusing that paper template over and over again, because it has all of the repositionable glue on the back of it, right? So now I'm going to do the same thing here. So you're going to find that this size, this is going to be a little bit easier to sew in than this one, because we had to deal with all of our seam allowances and that were inside this. This is just a nice curve that we're going to put in. We don't have any seams that we have to worry about. So what I'm going to do is take and do the same thing. I'm going to pin that edge. And notice that I'm leaving the paper on my B unit right now. And then I'm going to roll it around. And I'm going to leave the pin up along the edge there. And then I'm just going to take this and I'm going to kind of fold that fabric over just like I did before, so I can get this to come into the center. So that this kind of lays down there like that. Then we're going to grab our pin, glue pen, and we're going to start along this edge, and we're going to glue. And after I get almost to the center, then I'm going to come over and do the other side and work back. And then we'll finish up the center. There we go. Let's start with my paper. Move the pin. And remember, as you sew, you're going to lift your pressure foot and keep moving the fabric back underneath that, so it keeps the fabric in front of the needle flat. Then we're going to flip it over, and we're going to look to see if we sewed right on our line. And again, I can say, good job, Judy. All right, so now we're going to flip this. We're going to cut our threads. And we're going to go to our ironing board here and do some steaming and put this in. There's our first block finished. Okay, in your instructions on page 11, I want to bring your attention to the page that has the layout on for all of the block units, all right? it has the color of everything. So like you start up here, that's color B4, this is color B9, this is B1. These little blocks are made out of A1 and B1. Judel's going to go through this information on her to finish up the presentation on how to set this up. Earlier I said I like to sew the background pieces on and build a block. And that's the way you guys should do it too, is you need to set and sew all the background pieces to your, to these blocks. So you want to get all your backgrounds and get all these little pieces in. Then you're going to go in and find your big square blocks and you're going to position them and then come back and set all of these little pieces up on a design wall in the position. You don't want to go through and just cut a whole bunch of pieces out because you don't cut into every one of these rectangles. You're only going to cut into certain rectangles. So if you just stack it and go and cut through all of them, then you're going to have holes in everything and you won't have enough foundation units to fill in all those spaces. So you really have to pay attention to your instructions before you start setting in all of these floating circles. I'm going to show you guys how to do one of the little A groups. And what I'm doing here is I have my fabric, which is my B8 fabric right here. And then we have this piece right here, which is B6, right? And I need to find that location before I go cut it out. So you can see that I'm not supposed to cut this spot out, so I'm only going to cut out the little piece. I've already added some repositionable glue on the back side of this piece. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to cut that out right on that line. Okay, then we're going to remove that, and then this piece is going to be sewn into that spot, right? You're going to do it the same way where you're going to pin your sides. You're going to weave your pin down those side pieces there, and then we're going to roll this one around. When I'm pinning these, I want to make sure to get that pin up right along the edge here because that's what keeps that fabric from pulling back. After I get that pinned on both sides, then again, we're going to just take this and we're going to try to grab this fabric and gather it up. Basically, where I'm trying to gather this is right about the point of that paper piece underneath there. And now all I have to do is glue this. Now, if you find that your fabric just won't lay down, it's too tight, then you can come in here and just do just a little bit of clipping. And this is going to depend on the type of fabrics you're working with and what the thread count is on whether or not you're going to have to do that clipping. So I'm not going to tell you to just go through and do all your clipping. You really need to see if you can get it to lay down without clipping, and if you can't, then come in here and just do some clipping along that piece there. And so now if I just look at this, I got all of this fabric gathered up like that, and I'm ready to go sew. So I'm going to just take my little template piece here, and I'm going to fold this in half and use that as for something to sew on. And if you're using fabric or paper to sew on that has the repositionable glue on it, make sure you fold it to the repositionable glue is on the inside. You don't want that to be against your machine because you'll start sewing and then all of a sudden it just stops because the glue will stick to your machine. And if you do get repositionable glue on your machine, use your Clorox wipes. It comes right off with those, so, and just keep it clean. All right, so we're gonna start sewing. And again, just remember you've got to keep the fabric flat between, so by doing that, just pull it backwards and it'll flatten out all of the fabric right before the needle. Right, now I'm going to look at my back, and I can see that I stayed right on the line except right here. So see how I sewed off and I veered off on the end? I'm going to go back and re-sew that. And the reason why is because if I open this up, I'm going to lose almost 1/4 of an inch, so it's not going to match there. So I'm going to come back and clean up and sew right on that line. And to fix that, all I have to do is just put the paper up, and I'm just going to sew in just a little bit with it. There we have that fixed. So now when I open it up, I'm going to have a straight line along there and a straight line along here. And then that piece is going to fit right there into that pattern.
Now that Judy has shown you how to create the blocks for your Raindrops quilt, I'd like to share a few last pieces of information about your pattern with you before we go. First, Judy referenced a diagram near the end of the video that shows you how to lay out your colors. I'd like to take a little bit more time and explain this diagram to you. You will see references on the layout of the quilt that say A1, B1, A2, B2, etc. These are the accent and background pairs that you have sewn together and set up at the start of your pattern. Then there are smaller references in the background that say B1 to B10. These are the fabrics you cut with your T-templates. Use this as a guide to begin laying your quilt out on a design wall. Judy mentioned in the video that first you should assemble your Unit B and Unit A blocks, then add the T-template A pieces to create squares. Next, you should lay all the pieces out on a design wall as shown in the round 1 assembly graphic. Once this is done, you can go back and begin placing the floating Unit B and Unit C pieces as shown in the color layout, but before you can sew these into your quilt, you'll have to use your cutout graphics. Judy showed you how to use the T-templates as your cutout guides. However, she also mentioned earlier in the video that there were actual cutout templates that you could adhere to template plastic. These are referred to as CTC and CTB in your pattern. CTC means cutout template for the C units. CTB means cutout template for the B units. Note that if you choose to use the T-templates as Judy demonstrated, there will be some cases where you will need to flip that over so you can get your right and left cuts made properly. If you use the small melon-shaped CTC and CTB templates, you don't have to flip anything, just position it in the correct configuration as shown in the cutout assembly graphic for each cut. Then go back and complete the curved piecing as Judy showed in her video. On the last few pages of the pattern, there will also be final assembly graphics showing you how to sew and press all the squares together. While we give you the pressing lines for each square, you may want to repress some of the seams on the blocks where the Unit A, B, and C pieces come together, so you have interlocking seams where the pieces and the units intersect. Take special care at each of these intersections to provide the best pressing, as it will result in a flatter quilt in the end with less bulk across the quilt. Finally, I mentioned Quiltster earlier. This is an online program where you can open a blank line drawing of the quilt and add fabrics from across the quilting industry to see what your quilt will look like. Quiltster also has a marketplace where you can purchase kits designed by others or create a kit and purchase the fabrics. To find the marketplace, you must currently have a subscription to Quiltster. This will be changing in a few weeks as Quiltster is preparing to roll out a marketplace that doesn't require a subscription. In the meantime, they are offering a 1-month free trial of the software, which gives you access to the coloring tool and the marketplace. If you don't have Quiltster already, you can try it out by setting up an account, then entering the coupon code SPRING2020, which is all caps and one word. Once in the program, you will be on the dashboard. There, you can click on Marketplace. Next, click on Kits to find kits designed by others. Here are 3 that we presently have designed and are available to purchase through Quiltworx. The one on the right is the colorway Judy demonstrated here. The first kit that is purchased will be the one she demonstrated with, which means it will be cut out down to the template layout sheet. Several of the blocks will be made and it will be ready for you to continue sewing to complete the design. There are 2 other kits in this colorway. Each will come with yardage and you will begin cutting as described at the beginning of this video. If you are watching this video after it has been published for a while, the kits shown here may no longer be available. However, others may be. Or if you want to create your own and purchase it, click on Patterns instead of Kits in the Marketplace, find Raindrops, and color with fabrics that are available to purchase from our fabric partners. Finally, if you do not plan to purchase and want to work with a much wider selection of fabrics throughout the industry, you can choose My Projects, then Create New, then find the Raindrops pattern and start from there. When you work with this design in Quiltster, you cannot break the blocks down individually. Due to the scrappy nature of the quilt, you will open the entire quilt and add 10 A fabrics and 10 B fabrics, and it will place them in the location shown in the color layout graphic we showed earlier. Thank you for joining us for the Raindrops tutorial. We hope you enjoyed this class. We would also like to let you know that this same block can be used for patterns such as Splash, Clockworks, and Solar Flares. Each of these patterns have special cutting instructions that are outlined in those specific patterns, so please reference the specific patterns for how to prepare your fabrics. However, once you get to the stacking and piecing process for these quilts, this tutorial applies to those designs as well. They all have different assembly steps, but the information presented here will go a long way to help you learn to make each of those designs. All of them are available in Quiltster to color, and you can also check the marketplace for kits. When we released this video in April of 2020, there was one kit available for solar flares. So if you are interested, please look for it in the marketplace. Otherwise, look for other designs that may have been created since, or go out and create your own. Thank you.